Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's dive into a hospital story like no other, a saga featuring a true biscuit Karen in the wild. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. The Karen Chronicles. How one woman held an entire ward hostage. This story takes place when I was in the hospital and ended up being placed in the observation unit because no specialist beds were available. The observation unit is a catch-all ward for patients who need monitoring but aren't in immediate danger. It's bright and incredibly noisy, making it impossible to sleep. Enter Biscuit Karen. She arrived at 10 p.m. on the first day. Why is she called Biscuit Karen? Because she demanded a biscuit, and she was shouting this loud enough for everyone in the observation unit to hear. Never mind the time or the fact that we're all trying to sleep. Never mind that she's diabetic with a blood sugar level of 8.5, which is elevated, and she doesn't need any more sugar. Regardless, the nurses found her a biscuit and told her to quiet down. Biscuit Karen did not quiet down. Shouting seems to be her default setting, and she didn't seem to care that other patients existed. After 10 minutes of noise, she demanded another biscuit. The nurses, already dealing with other things, gave it to her. Then, 15 minutes later, she screamed again for another biscuit. The nurses, busy with other patients, didn't respond right away. She raised her voice even louder, as if we hadn't heard her. At this point, the nurses were starting to lose patience. They reminded her that her blood sugar level was high, but she insisted on the biscuit. So she got another one. This time, I swear the nurses must have drugged it because she went to sleep shortly afterward, only to start snoring loudly. This was just the beginning, though. Day 2, 11 p.m., Biscuit Karen had been fine all day. She could walk with a walking aid and go to the toilet by herself, but she didn't want to. She screamed for a nurse to help her onto the commode. A blunt nurse told her she could walk the short distance to the toilet herself, but Karen wouldn't accept this. She kept yelling for help. So eventually the blunt nurse went to check, and sure enough, Karen had wet herself out of sheer passive-aggressive stubbornness. The nurse was shocked, but Karen didn't care. Now the bed was soaked and needed to be changed. The blunt nurse helped her onto the commode and went to fetch spare sheets, but of course other patients were causing trouble. There was an alcoholic man who couldn't walk but kept trying and falling, and a woman with a broken neck who kept trying to wander. So the nurses were kept busy, and Biscuit Karen was left alone. Naturally, she wasn't having any of that. "Can somebody help me?" she yelled repeatedly, waking everyone up. Then it became, "Somebody help me, my back hurts," and she just wouldn't stop. She was loud, obnoxious, and caused herself unnecessary discomfort. I was peeved, and so were the other patients. Eventually, the blunt nurse returned and an argument broke out. Biscuit Karen was angry that she'd been left on the commode and was now making everything worse. In the heat of the moment, she slapped the nurse. The blunt nurse didn't tolerate that nonsense. She abandoned the bed-making task, left Biscuit Karen on the commode, and ignored her calls for help. She told the other irate patient she wasn't risking any more aggression, and we all supported her. At that point, a more compassionate nurse tried to finish the bed, but Biscuit Karen wasn't done. She called the nurse the N-word and told her to go back to where she came from. The nurse didn't stick around to deal with that, and blunt nurse called security. Now Biscuit Karen started yelling, "I want my phone! Where's my phone?" Presumably so she could make threats and say, "I'm going to report you. I'm going to get you fired." The nurses wisely didn't give her the phone. Meanwhile, the other patients had had enough and started yelling at her to shut up. By now it was after midnight, and nobody could sleep. Biscuit Karen kept yelling, "Somebody help me," every 3 seconds. The nurses ignored her, and the other patients reacted with verbal abuse. She didn't seem to hear them at all. She just continued her tantrum, now completely lost in her self-pity. Finally, around 1 a.m., security arrived. They saw a distressed old lady who claimed the nurses were hurting her, even accusing one of them of hitting her. An audacious lie. However, it didn't take long for Biscuit Karen's facade to fail. She started sweet-talking the new, young, handsome doctor who arrived, obviously thinking he'd be her rescuer. She went from shouting to a sweet, compliant old lady in an instant, though she tried to repeat her assault claim. But the doctor wasn't buying it. Thanks to the statements of several patients, 2 nurses, and the security footage, it was clear she was lying. She was given her medication, helped to bed, and finally fell asleep. However, the rest of us couldn't sleep because of all the adrenaline running through us. The next day, I was just relieved to leave that chaotic and exhausting environment. OMG, she should have been kicked out of the hospital. Not sure how old that biscuit Karen was, but it isn't an excuse to hit a nurse. No one should have to deal with these people screaming to be served first. I hope that whatever you had or have isn't life-threatening. And nurses are doing as best as they can with the short staff. Shout out to all the nurses for your hard work. It's not easy to work with patients at times. And our second story. Treat your employees like garbage? Enjoy an extra 100-plus emails a day. I'm finally leaving my toxic job for a better opportunity. My narcissistic boss treats everyone under her like crap and is generally rude, condescending, and miserable to work for. We work in a field where we're constantly bombarded by salespeople, many of whom are extremely persistent and borderline rude. I sometimes get over 100 emails a day from such salespeople, not to mention phone calls. But I have specific rules set up in my Outlook so that they mostly go straight to my junk folder. My boss is not so good at Outlook or technology in general, so she doesn't know how to do this. She would often scream at me to find emails for her because somehow she couldn't even figure out how the search function worked. When I resigned, she told me to notify every representative I am regularly in contact with that I am leaving and that she's the new point of contact until they find a replacement for me. I spent the last week providing each and every salesperson with her email and direct dial. Good luck getting rid of those. I genuinely am curious about why screaming at someone's not a one-strike offense for your average adult employee. Especially in this economy? I'd rather go flip burgers for a good person than be the target of someone's immaturity and rage. And our last story. Pregnant Karen blocking my parking space. I live in a 4-unit condo. We share 2 large garage doors with each bay holding 2 cars side by side. Each homeowner is allotted exactly 8 feet 1 inch of space, tight but manageable. My neighbor, Karen, drives a massive 4Runner, and the problem is she always parks 9 inches or more over her allotted space, making it nearly impossible for me to park in the garage. Sometimes she parks so far over that I literally can't fit my car in. Street parking in our neighborhood isn't an option unless you're okay with racking up parking tickets, so I've had no choice but to address the issue. The first time it happened, I knocked on Karen's door, called and texted her, but there was no response. Frustrated, I parked in the driveway as a temporary solution and texted her to let her know. Hi Karen, your car's parked too far over and I can't fit into the garage. I had to park in the driveway for now. Please let me know when you've moved it so I can park inside, thanks. She didn't respond until much later, and when she did, it was a curt message. Sorry, I'll move it next time. The problem didn't stop there. A week later, I came home to find her 4Runner even further into my space. Once again, I parked in the driveway and sent a polite text. Hi, Karen. I hope you're doing well. I noticed your car is parked over the line again, and I'm having trouble fitting into my garage space. I was thinking maybe I could get the spaces professionally marked to help us both stay within our allotted areas. Let me know what you think. This time, she responded at midnight claiming, I'm pregnant and can't fit the car properly unless I park this way. The next morning, she called me 8 times at 5 a.m. to move my car from the driveway because it was apparently blocking her in. When I finally woke up and moved my car, I started thinking about a more permanent solution. I decided to hire a contractor to mark clear lines in the garage based on the official survey measurements. The lines went down later that week, and at first Karen begrudgingly parked within her space. For about a week, things were peaceful. Then she switched back to driving her Scion sedan, which fits perfectly in the garage. I thought the issue was resolved until one night I came home late from work and found her 4Runner back in the garage, parked entirely over the line. I couldn't fit my car in the garage at all. I called Karen to ask her to move her car, This time her boyfriend came out and moved it while glaring at me like I was the villain. I thought, fine, as long as this stops, but it didn't. A few days later, I came home to find her 4Runner diagonally parked in the garage, taking up my entire space and part of the shared driveway. Furious, I knocked on her door. When Karen opened it, she immediately went on the offensive. Karen, why are you harassing me? I'm pregnant, and you don't understand how hard it is to park this car. Me, Karen, you're blocking my space and the driveway. Move your car or I'm calling a tow truck. Karen, I dare you. If you call a tow truck, I'll call the police and tell them you're harassing a pregnant woman. Let's see who they believe. At that point, I'd had enough. I walked back to my car, snapped photos of her parking job, and called a towing company. When Karen saw me on the phone, she stormed out in her slippers, screaming, Karen, you can't do this. I'm a paying homeowner. You have no right to tow my car. I ignored her, and within minutes, the tow truck arrived. As soon as the driver stepped out, Karen planted herself in front of her 4Runner, arms spread wide like a human barricade. Karen, you touch my car and I'll sue you for harassment. I'll sue him too, she yelled, pointing at me. At this point, I'd already called the police to ensure everything was handled legally. When the officers arrived, Karen immediately launched into her victim act. Karen, officer, he's harassing me and trying to steal my car. I'm pregnant and he won't leave me alone. I calmly explained the situation to the officers, showing them the marked spaces, the survey documentation, and the photos I'd just taken of her car. I even pulled up the long string of texts where I'd politely asked her to park within her space. Luckily, a few other neighbors came outside to confirm my story. The officer turned to Karen. Officer, ma'am, do you have any reason to be parked like this? Karen, I'm pregnant. I can't fit in the space properly. Officer, pregnancy isn't a free pass to break the law or inconvenience your neighbors. You need to move your car immediately or it'll be towed. Karen refused. She crossed her arms and shouted, go ahead and tow it. I'll take you all to court. The officer sighed and nodded to the tow truck driver. Watching Karen's 4Runner get hooked up and hauled away was chef's kiss satisfying. Karen stood on the sidewalk screaming at everyone. Karen, you're all going to regret this. I'm suing the HOA, the tow company, and you, she shouted at me. The officer handed her a ticket for blocking the driveway and reminded her that any future violations would result in additional fines or towing. She stormed back inside, slamming her door so hard that it rattled the windows. If she didn't make it impossible for you to park in the garage, this wouldn't have happened. Doesn't matter if she's pregnant or not. It's a shared garage, and she should make room for both cars to fit. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.